Wonderful.
Okay.
Right. So, yeah, this is good. There's a lot of content to cover. So we'll be making sure we get through everything. We'll do our best. Questions in the chat. I think there is a welcome slide in a minute, Chloe. Oh, no, you took it out. You took the housekeeping one out. So housekeeping, just to let everyone know, we're recording this. So if you really don't want your face being seen when when we switch the slides off, then turn your camera off. And throw your questions in the chat. We'll do our best to answer them. There is a panel session at the end, which we've got about 20 minutes for. So if you've got questions for the panel, hold them back for a bit. If you've got questions about the LNRS or nature recovery, put them in the chat because there's so many experts here tonight, they'll be able to help you. Right, I think that's the housekeeping done. Over to you then, Chloe.
Thanks, Ant. Right, hopefully everyone can see the slides. I had a couple of difficulties, so I'm going to be asking Ant to help me through the slides. There's technical problems. So if we go on to the next one. By way of introduction, for those who may not have come across me yet, my name is Chloe. I am working at Oxfordshire County Council, and I've been employed there for a couple of months since authorities were appointed as responsible for creating local nature recovery strategies. And that happened in June 23. The DEFRA appointed various authorities, and so I've been working at Oxfordshire County Council since. And so Oxfordshire County Council is designated as what they've called responsible authority. We're supposed to lead and create the local nature recovery strategies, but it's really important that we do that in a partnership approach so that it works with existing strategies and an understanding of what's already happened from so many of the organisations that you can see here who are partners on the project. And we also have the district and city councils who are particularly important in terms of making sure this works through planning on the ground in the future. And then obviously there's the delivery aspect from all the other partners involved. So there's a lot of people coming together to bring their information of what they already know about Oxfordshire alongside this project, and that's really important. So that's that slide. Next one, please, Ant. Thank you. In terms of what nature recovery is from an LNRS perspective, because this word or term could mean a lot to different people, we understand from the LNRS that the UK is considered to be one of the most nature depleted countries in the world, and that is also a case for Oxfordshire, where we've had a significant decline in the abundance of our species. And those two documents there are really useful if people haven't come across them yet. So we know that there is a need to accelerate efforts to help nature, and that's been acknowledged by the government. And in 2021, there were legally binding commitments that will improve nature and stop the loss of biodiversity, which is what the LNRS is part of and working towards alongside other commitments by the government. So biodiversity are our various species of animals, plants, fungi and microorganisms as well. And the task of local nature recovery strategies is to identify the best priority areas where we should increase biodiversity and, where possible, also try to maximise other benefits. So where we might be looking to create woodlands, wetlands, heathlands, to also look at ways to, if possible, improve people's health, mitigate flood risk, excess heat or pollution as well. So there's other benefits that we can get from improving nature. Next slide, please. Across England at the moment, there are 48 authority areas who are all currently scrabbling away to prepare local nature recovery strategies that will be published come 2025. Everyone has slightly different timelines based on their resource, staffing levels, and so on. So you can see that we are right in the middle of sort of southern England, and we are number 30. We cover 260,000 hectares of opportunity, and we are particularly interested in our role. We don't have coast, but we have got a role connecting multiple counties, and it's that cross-border opportunity that's quite exciting for our LNRS. And as you can see, there's a lot of these being created now. We are one of those. And these are the steps we're following in order to create the strategy documents and the map. And those are the two things that form the LNRS. So going through this flowchart quickly, this is what DEFRA has given us and the steps that we're required to follow. We need to map areas that are of particular existing importance for biodiversity, so understand what we've already got. We then go on to understand where actions for nature have already been taken. This is really supposed to happen later on after, but we will be looking to try and bring in an understanding of where actions have already been taken. I'll talk a bit more about that later. And so that brings us into step 3, where we write a description of Oxfordshire, the strategy area, as well as its biodiversity, the opportunities for recovery. And then step 4 is where we have started this process with you all. So many of you might have helped us to start understanding the priorities and the potential measures. So those are the actions as well as the things that people want to see happen in the county. And then finally, we're required to map that, and that will give us a couple of major documents, 2 of which are the Statement of Biodiversity Priorities and the Local Habitat Map that forms a big part of the strategy. Next slide, please. So a good question is, what does that actually look like? What does the strategy actually do or look like, or what are the documents? So this comes from an example from the West of England Combined Authority, who have currently got their draft version of the Local Nature Recovery Strategy online, and they started about a year before most other authority areas in England. So they've been very, very supportive and helpful, leading the way for the rest of us. And the 4 main documents that will be going up that relate to the Local Nature Recovery Strategy, the first one is a written list called the Statement of Biodiversity Priorities. And it comes from that workshops and survey work that we've been doing with you all, as well as reviews of strategy documents. We create a list of priorities for the area. You'll be able to review that draft later in the year and comment on it before we create the final version. We then will also have a species priority list that narrows down the 879 threatened or near threatened species for Oxfordshire down to a short and manageable list, which is quite a task in itself. We then have a written description of the strategy area, which is a document that speaks through various elements of Oxfordshire and the types of biodiversity within Oxfordshire, the opportunities for recovery. And finally, the 4th element is the local habitat map, which is considered an interactive tool you can zoom in and out of to see the types of actions that are suggested as priority in order to meet priorities in different areas. So for example, there might be areas where wetland could be created. Those will be outlined, and then it will tell you about the priority that's aiming to achieve. Alongside improving biodiversity, it might also benefit people in other ways, like helping mitigate flooding. And we'll go on to the next slide. Those are the things then that you'd be expecting to see come public consultation, and we put out that draft version later in the year before we finalise it. So that gives you an opportunity to comment on it. When we spoke to people during the workshops and surveys, people mentioned that August and September, the summer holidays, were a terrible time for public consultation. We have moved that to September to late October, and that's now reflected on the documents going out. So this slide here will show you that, and you will be able to have a copy of all these slides after the presentation as well. Next slide, please. So very quickly, I'll try and cover what the LNRS is and isn't for those who may not be aware. The LNRS is trying to agree a shared list of priorities for the recovery of biodiversity in Oxfordshire. It identifies priority locations to create, improve and restore habitat, where possible, also identifying benefits for the wider environment and people. It's designed to be a tool to help guide funding, so private, voluntary and public funding towards those areas to start achieving the priorities. It will include that map of some of our existing habitats, really valuable habitats that we have, and those coming together will help to support planners across city, district and county to make informed decisions with regard to the LNRS, so that we can all visualise those actions that we need to deliver together. There is no one body or organisation expected to deliver all these actions. It has to be an effort together. Next slide. This then covers what the LNRS isn't. So the areas and priorities that we map, the actions and areas that we map to achieve those priorities do not have to be completed in those areas. You can still take other actions. So if you wanted to tell us about something you're thinking of doing, you're not going to be held to it. We're not intending with the LNRS to stop people doing what they're already doing. There's a lot of good work happening now, and we want people to continue those actions and those efforts. And it's not designed to fast track any permissions processes for changing land use. It doesn't replace site level detailed delivery plans. They still need to be created, but it's a higher level suggestion to help people create their own plans. And it is not a comprehensive plan for managing sewage, flood risk, climate adaptation, or the creation of new developments. We do have the opportunity to impact those through the influence that the LNRS can have on planning, but we don't create new legislation or enforce actions on other bodies around sewage or flood risk, much as we might see that they're very important parts of nature's recovery, and that's very clear from what we've heard. I think that might be it from me now. That was just a whistle-stop introduction to the LNRS for those who may not have heard yet. And we can't hear you.
Still muted, Anne.
Great. Apologies for that. So yeah, we had a couple of people who missed the start. So if you've got any questions, throw them in the chat, and then hopefully some smart people on the call will be able to answer them, or we'll pick them up towards the end when we've got the panel session. So please do put your comments, chats, questions in there. And I will now give you a bit of an overview of the engagement workshops that we've delivered. So just get my slides and share that screen. So I definitely recognize quite a few faces here. So I know a number of these of you attended some of our workshops. So don't worry, I'm not going to get you to use Slido. I'm going to take you through what we covered and what we found out. So as I say, myself, my colleague Leslie and my colleague Paula, we come from a company called ALP Synergy Limited, and we were responsible for delivering the engagement workshops, which were planned to start in February and run throughout March. Ended up, they all ran in March, and we finished them all before the Easter holidays. So we were delighted with getting them completed. There were 12 workshops in total, which engaged around 308 people. I say around because one of the workshops was one where we joined another event, so we didn't really capture the data on those people. But if you just take that 308 people by the 2 hours of time that they engaged in, there's over 700 hours of people talking about Oxfordshire in nature, which is quite impressive. It probably doesn't happen very often that many hours of time are spoken by so many people about nature. Those people turning up, over 70 of them represented community groups or were individuals that were passionate about nature. We engaged 20 young people through a specific workshop for students. We had 90 plus professionals that came from councils, local authorities, city council, or councillors, or from nature recovery organisations, nature organisations. We had 10 business leaders that engaged. We had a very specific workshop for businesses, but a number of businesses came to other workshops as well. We had 32 farmers and landowners, which is really important for Oxfordshire, given that it's more than 70% farmland. And we had over 100 species experts. And, you know, chatting to species experts really opened my eyes about how passionate some people can be about something so specific and so tiny. And there's a little caveat there. Note, there might be some minor double counting in here, because some of the business leaders may well have been community members, and some of the nature recovery people were also residents of Oxfordshire, etc. So there's a little bit of double counting in those numbers, but there were 308 people that engaged. And those people came from across Oxfordshire. When we set out, our ambitions were to run our workshops across the whole of the county. You'll see those black dots. Unfortunately, those black dots were venues and events that we booked, but we just could not get enough people to register for them. So as much as we tried to get out into the outer extremities of Oxfordshire, we had much greater success in the centre. So the white dots show our 9 in-person workshops, and then the ones that we couldn't manage to recruit for, we converted them into online workshops largely. So yeah, we covered the whole of the county. And in terms of the sorts of people that attended, obviously we collected demographic information from the people that attended. And you can see there we've got a reasonable spread of ages, but it certainly looks like the the age bracket 54 to 64 were the ones who had the most time or the most inclination to engage with our workshops. But we had some people over 85, and we had some people in the 16 to 24 bracket, obviously the student workshop. And we had a number of people that would prefer not to say. I might be inclined to think that they were probably in the older age brackets, but it doesn't really matter. A good spread of age. In terms of gender, then we had 50% of our attendees, near enough, were female. And the other, just under 50%, were either male or would prefer not to say. So again, maybe, you know, females a little bit more passionate. I don't want to start an argument, a little bit more passionate about nature. Who knows? But the big gap for us was in our diversity in terms of, you know, ethnicity. And we did try. Some of our in-person events were, you know, spread around the county in places where we knew that the community was more diverse. But well over 90% of our attendees, probably over 98% of our attendees, were self-declared as white, British, Irish, or other white background. So only one or two people at most from the other groups that we were collecting, although a number of people did prefer not to say. So we know that there is a challenge in terms of the diversity of those who get engaged with nature and nature recovery and the environment sector as a whole. It's not something specific to the workshops we ran or to Oxfordshire. It's something that the whole environment sector needs to address. So I did mention, I made a little joke. I said we're not going to get you to use Slido, but we did use Slido in the workshops. It was an opportunity for us to use an online tool that allowed everybody to engage, and we used paper as well. So if they don't want to go online, they could give us their information. As you see, people were able to put information in, they were able to vote, etc. But Slido proved to be a really useful tool, and it gave us a lot of information that we could then use. And this is an example of that. So we asked people what their priority outcomes were. And this compiles across all of the workshops. And you can see here that the number one priority outcome, 81%, was to improve the condition of rivers and other freshwater habitats, ponds, lakes, ditches. And you can see the percentage for the other ones. There was definite differences between the groups. But as I say, this is the overall view. Where there was quite a lot of consistency, the lowest priority in every single group was the bottom one here, controlling animals, plants and fungi that damage our nature, so the invasive species. We also asked about priority benefits. So I guess it links with the one we've just seen. So we've got, in terms of priority outcomes, we've got improve the condition of rivers at the top. In terms of priority benefits, improve water quality in rivers, ponds, ditches and lakes. So 82%, so a clear winner. But then also reduce the impacts of flooding. Don't forget, we ran these workshops in March. I know it's a lovely spring, sunny evening tonight, but back in March, most of Oxfordshire was still covered by floodwater. So it's no surprise that that came out quite high as well. So we collected lots of information. We also asked people about actions that they thought were needed to support nature recovery. Now, there were over 431 actions suggested, and I can't do a slide with that on, and I can't do enough slides to cover all of that. So I've created a word cloud so that you can see what sorts of words were coming out. If you're not familiar with a word cloud, the more times the word was mentioned, the bigger it is on here. So clearly nature is there, but we've also got really strong more. So people wanted more of things that they were connected with and that they understood. We've got local, we've got people, we've got educate, we've got biodiverse, we've got connecting with schools, we've got work. But if you look really close, you can see there's so much in there. There's so much information in terms of the actions that people suggested. And all of this information is feeding into the LNRS. We also asked about actions that were already being taken. Now, we only collected 132 of those, so slightly less. But again, a word cloud of that. You can see nature up there at the top, but local coming through again. Farm, probably not a surprise, given that we did have 2 workshops with farmers and landowners. And we do think that you know, a lot of the actions that are already being taken are connected with farmland and, you know, with some of the bigger open spaces. But we've got community on there, we've got water, we've got hedges. Hedges were talked about a lot. So again, all of these slides will be shared, so you can zoom in and you can look at some of the detail on these. And we asked each of our groups about a vision. So we asked them what their vision would be, and we collected probably well over 100 vision statements. For some of the workshops, we created a live word cloud. What I've done here is looked across all of those visions and just tried to pull together something that would cover all of them. So Oxfordshire is a clean, thriving environment, rich in wildlife, with accessible nature across schools, farms and towns, fostering awareness and action. A strategic network of diverse habitats, prioritising restoration near homes, supports health and biodiversity. A resilient landscape connected for active travel encourages community engagement and responsible stewardship. Oxfordshire leads in nature recovery with shared responsibility, enhanced green infrastructure and a flourishing countryside cherished by all. Now, clearly that isn't, you know, the exact vision that we should have, but it does capture a lot of the sentiment that came through the workshops. And all of those visions are feeding into the local nature recovery strategy. So coming towards the end then, if we, instead of creating a summary vision, if we do the word cloud thing again, you see I like word clouds, then this is what happens with those vision statements. Habitat, wildlife, connected, more, all of those words that we want to see in terms of nature for Oxfordshire coming through loud and clear. So to finish off then, I think probably the last word that I should share, or maybe the last image that I should share, actually came from our graphic artist who joined us in one of our latter workshops to capture what was discussed. So this was a community-led workshop. We delivered it in the centre of Oxford at the old fire station. And this is the visual capture of what they talked about on that evening. So you can see our wonderful River Thames flowing through there. You can see the little beavers as ecosystem managers. You can see the otter down at the bottom, which looks like it's being a very well-behaved otter. Lots about river corridors, lots about connecting the whole county, lots about everybody being involved. So this image is going to get used probably far and wide. So hopefully you'll see this and it'll become a familiar summary of Oxfordshire's local nature recovery strategy engagement. And with that, I shall stop my sharing. Hopefully if you attended one of the workshops, some of that resonated with you, some of that meant something. It does appear that we have hit a limit and we've hit a barrier. So we've got to our 100 participants and a lot of people are stuck in the waiting room and we can't get in. That shouldn't have happened because Zoom, this is a 500 person event. So I'm not sure what Zoom's doing, but I will hand over to Julie, who I think is up next to talk about the survey results, and while she does that, I'll look and see if I can sort out the tech, let a few more people in. So Julie, over to you.
Yeah.
Right, and we'll find someone to mute. There we go.
Okay, can you see the large screen okay?
We can see the full screen, Julie.
Okay. All right, thank you. So I'm Julie from DJS Research, and I've got my colleagues Claire and Jasmine on the call as well, who've helped to put all this together. So just first of all, cover what we're going to go through, a quick recap on the survey background and objectives, have a look at who responded to the survey, then start by looking at the feedback in terms of the long-term vision for Oxfordshire, look at the outcomes and benefits that are considered most important by the survey respondents, then move on to look at the nature recovery actions that people think Oxfordshire should be taking, and then looking to the next 1 to 10 years, looking at the actions that residents and stakeholders are planning to take, and then we'll finish with just a few of the key learnings at the end. So the survey background, so the survey itself was conducted by Oxfordshire County Council. We didn't actually do the survey, but it was an online survey, and it asked individuals and stakeholder groups about their nature priorities and actions for Oxfordshire. It was open from the 20th of February and closed on the 31st of March, and in total received 650 responses, which I think is perhaps more than what was expected, so a really good response rate. As I go through the slides, just to point out that not everybody had to answer all the questions. So of those 650 responded to the survey in total, not all 650 answered every single question. So on the slides, we have shown how many people answered each question, so you know what figures it's based on. So in terms of who responded to the survey, so of the 650 people that responded, and they're asked which of these groups they fell into, and they could actually tick more than one of these. So the percentages do add up to more than 100%. But overall, around 9 in 10 are residents of Oxfordshire, and then we've got 9% who are part of a local community group, and then representation also from landowners, councillors, businesses, and various other stakeholders groups being represented. Small proportion based outside Oxfordshire, so a member of the public living outside Oxfordshire, but generally the vast majority are residents. In terms of the profile of the people that responded, overall we got good representation in terms of district, which represented similar to what you'd expect across the county. By age, I think this is similar to what you've just seen in the workshops, tended to overrepresent older people, so around 3/4 of the respondents were age 45 plus, so a lower representation from the younger groups. Survey asked them about their sex, and about 65%, about 2/3 are female, which again is overrepresented compared to the Oxfordshire population. In terms of illness, disability, that's closer to what we would have expected in terms of how the population falls out. And then ethnicity, again, similar to the workshops, around 9 in 10 were from a white ethnic background. So again, an overrepresentation compared to the actual population. So looking then at the long-term vision for Oxfordshire. So respondents were asked for 2 statements, the extent to which they agree or disagree with these statements. So first of all, I would like to do more to increase nature in Oxfordshire. And you can see that overall 93% were in agreement with that statement. So 76% strongly agreed, and a further 17% agree. So as well as the 93% in agreement, there's 4% who already think they're doing as much as they can. And then for the second statement, I think it's important to carry out actions to support nature, plants, animals, and other wildlife in towns and cities. Virtually all in agreement with that statement, so 97% in agreement. And for both of those, there's very little variation between the different stakeholder groups or by district, so it's pretty universal, around more than 9 in 10 agreeing with each of those statements. The survey then asked about the barriers that might stop people from doing more for nature. I've got these listed in order from the ones that people mentioned most through to the ones that were mentioned least. And it shows that the top barrier that was mentioned most by 40% of people is the fact that they don't own or manage the land that they think action is needed on. So not owning or managing the land is the top barrier. And then the other things that were mentioned most, 24% saying that the land they manage or own is too small. Similar proportion feel like they lack time. And there's quite a considerable proportion, the 21% and the 15% who are saying that they don't know how they could or should take action or where to take action. So some general uncertainty about how they can get involved or take action. If there were no limits at all, the respondents were asked what they would like nature to feel like, look like, or be like in Oxfordshire in the future. And the top comment that came out here was for more rewilding wild spaces. So 23% would like to see that if there was no limits, followed by improved accessibility and the integration of nature into daily life. And then we just pulled out a couple of quotes there just to give you, like, obviously there's lots of word for the actual wording that people said behind these themes that have been pulled out, but just as an example, one person saying that the wild area is where nature does its own thing with minimum intervention. That's just an example of the kind of comments that are coming through. And looking at the outcomes and the benefits. So first of all, for the outcomes, for these 9 outcomes, people were asked to rate these from low importance up to high importance, which was a 5, so from 1 to 5. And the bars that we've shown here are people who have given each of these a 4 or a 5, so they consider them to be important. And the top ones that come out, 97% each, are improving the condition of rivers for fresh water and preventing pollution from entering our environment. So 97% of the respondents, considering those sort of very or quite important, gave them a rating of 4 or 5. But overall, all of these outcomes, the lowest proportion, 72%, mentioned about controlling the animals, plants and fungi that damage our nature. 72% consider that important. So although it's the lowest one, it still shows that all of these are considered important outcomes for Oxfordshire to achieve.
Can I ask you a quick question? Am I the only person that can't see your slides?
I think you might. We can see the slides.
Yeah, able to see them.
Did you manage? Could you see the slides when I was presenting earlier?
Yeah.
Yes, I could, but I can't see the slides now. But if I'm the only one, that's fine. If it's just me, it's probably my connection. I do apologise.
No problem.
In terms of the benefits, and again, this question asked people to rate each of the benefits from 1 to 5. So 1, low importance or low priority for them, up to 5 with high importance. So again, we've shown here the people who've rated each of these 4 or 5, so considering the most important. And improving water quality, this comes out top in terms of the one that was considered most important to achieve. Boosting the economy and supporting sustainable businesses, 61% considered that importance. That was the lowest of importance, but again, still majority considering all these important benefits to be achieved. Respondents were also asked, after they've looked through the outcomes and the benefits, if there was anything else that they consider to be important in terms that they'd like to see for nature in Oxfordshire. So they could, again, sort of in their own words, put extra things that they think is important. And the main theme that came out here, or the top theme, was to stop building or development on greenfield, green land. So 16% suggesting that's something else which is important to them in terms of priority outcomes or benefits. And then the next one, cleaner rivers, streams, canals, followed by a few more that's around 10% down, mentioning each of those. And again, we just pulled out a couple of quotes there as examples of the kind of things that people have mentioned. So the population of Oxfordshire is going to get bigger and climate change is going to get worse. And as it does, we need to make sure we use the land better. That's just an example of a comment from a resident. And then in terms of the actual actions, so in this section of the survey, it went through each of the 9 outcomes that were suggested and asked people to list in their own words what actions they think they feel are needed for each of them. So from this slide, for each of the 9 outcomes, we've listed the top action that was mentioned for each of them. And across all of these, around 87 individual actions were mentioned, or 87 themes. But you can see for 3 of them, the stop sewage discharge pollution has come out top. So the top most mentioned action across 3 of those outcomes. So for improving the condition of our existing upper habitats, improving the condition of our rivers and other freshwater habitats, and preventing pollution from entering our environment, the top or the most commonly mentioned action related to stopping sewage and discharge pollution. And the percentages mentioned each of those are shown there in the table. The other action that comes out as the most frequently mentioned for 2 of the theme of the outcomes is the restoration, creation, maintenance of habitats. So yeah, a lot of actions related to that kind of sort of overall theme or topic. We've shown just an example here, because obviously rather than go through all 9 of them, we wouldn't have time to do it in this slot, but just as an example for, so for the first one, for improving the condition of our existing habitats, all the individual actions that people mentioned related to this outcome, we've summarised them into the themes, the common themes that came out across those actions. So the top one being rivers, waterways and freshwater habitats. But there's the top 5 themes overall, and then the top 2 specific actions within this outcome is stopping the sewage discharge that we just looked at on the previous slide, and better protection, maintenance of rivers. So each of those mentioned 16% of respondents, their actions kind of could go into that sort of general heading. People also mentioned references to specific locations, which will be on the kind of fuller list that we circulate later on, but all that information is basically recorded for each of the outcomes, and obviously will feed into the whole long listing and short listing process. And then, as well as the 9 outcomes that had been suggested, people could also mention any other nature recovery actions they feel Oxfordshire should take. And again, these have been summarised into themes, and the actions have been sort of put into general groupings to sort of summarise what people have said. And overall, development, infrastructure and public involvement are the top 2 themes that are coming out of the comments that were added at that section of the survey. But overall, across those 9 outcomes, there's close to 6,000 individual sort of actions or comments mentioned. So lots and lots of different information coming through there that fit into the 87 broader categories that we looked at earlier. But as you can see, you're covering all sorts of different habitats that are mentioned there, from ponds, meadows, soil, fens, heathland. So lots of actions for us to look through and work through to help feed into the strategy. And then the final section, people were asked about whether they're planning to take any nature recovery actions in the next 1 to 10 years. And overall, close to 6 in 10 respondents said they are planning to take any action in the next 10 years, so 58% overall. But then we've shown how that splits out into the different stakeholder types, and you can see that residents are actually less likely compared to some of the other stakeholder groups to be saying they're going to be taking action, or they're planning on taking action in the next 10 years. The local community groups, landowners, local authority officers, councillors are actually more likely than residents generally. But still a majority have got some plans in place. And then when asked about what those plans are, so if they could describe what it is they're planning in the next 1 to 10 years, again, we've kind of sort of summarised this into general themes of what's been mentioned. And the most commonly mentioned action that's been planned is related to their domestic gardens or personal spaces, personal gardens. So 84% saying that they're planning on taking action related to that. And then the next highest proportion, around a third, talking about installing swift boxes, and a similar proportion creating wildlife habitats. And just to mention, obviously, people could mention more than one action here, so the percentages do add up to more than 100%. But in terms of the type of land that they're planning on taking action on, it tends to be more rural areas than urban areas. So just to summarise, obviously there's a lot of information sort of that goes behind all this, but some of the key themes that I've pulled out, obviously overall good response to the survey, 650 respondents, mostly residents, but obviously there's some overlap between these different groups, but there was also representation from community groups, businesses, councillors, farmers. More than 9 in 10 agree that they'd like to do more to increase nature in Oxfordshire and think it's important to carry out actions to support nature in towns and cities. Not owning or managing the land is the most commonly mentioned barrier for not doing more for nature, while around 1 in 4 say the land they own is too small or they lack time, and many respondents don't know what they could or should do or where to take action. If there are no limits, respondents would most like to see increased rewilding, improved accessibility and the integration of nature into daily life. and connectivity between habitats is also frequently mentioned. And then of the 9 outcomes presented to respondents, improving the condition of rivers, freshwater, and preventing pollution of all types entering the air environment are considered the top 2 most important outcomes. In terms of benefits, improving water quality is considered the most important to achieve. But then overall, across all the 9 outcomes, 87 different sort of themes or action types were mentioned. But within this, stopping sewage, discharge of pollution is the most frequently mentioned, followed by the restoration, creation, and maintenance of habitats. And then when asked about anything else that respondents consider important, so other than the 9 outcomes, the most frequently mentioned theme is about stop building and developing on greenfield land. And then looking to the next 10 years, around 6 in 10 respondents are planning on taking action, nature recovery actions. And where they are, the most frequently mentioned actions relate to their own gardens or personal spaces. And a third mentioned installing Swift boxes. So we're going to be circulating a copy of these slides later after the webinar, but if there's any questions, you can take them at the end or in the chat. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Julie. And yeah, my apologies to anyone that's missed the start. We had a challenge with the technology, but people are now creeping in, which is good. So they're going to be able to still ask questions and hear this. And this is being recorded, so you'll be able to look back over it and you'll be able to get the slides as well. We'll compile them all into a pack and share a link for them to be downloaded. So thank you very much, Julie. Next on my list of presenters is Paul Candling from Natural England. I'll get your slides up for you, Paul, and then
thanks, Ant.
Share the screen. And then this one. So Paul is going to talk about the prioritization process. Hopefully you can see the slides there.
Yeah, thanks, Ant, and good evening, everyone. And it's great to see that we've passed the 100 mark and people are now getting in to see our presentations. Just go back to the first slide, actually, and just as a brief introduction to what I'm doing, what I'm talking about tonight. So I'm here to talk about how, through the LNRS process, we will agree priorities and potential measures for nature recovery. And to do this, we're following a clear set of guidance produced by DEFRA and Natural England. There's 3 key messages from that guidance, and that number 1 is we must work with stakeholders to ensure they play a significant role in developing the priorities so that we have a product that stakeholders understand, are invested in, and will want to support delivery. We will need to present these priorities, ensuring they're accessible to different end users. And lastly, we are encouraged to achieve a balanced approach by drawing on both criteria and preference-based factors, so both through expert opinion and through focused stakeholder opinion. Next slide, please, Anne. So the priorities and measures are clearly defined in the guidance. Priorities are the end results that the strategy is seeking to achieve with a focus on habitats and species, and measures are the specific practical actions that will help to deliver the agreed priorities. In the boxes to the right, if you can see them, are some examples of what those priorities and their related measures might look like. So the first box gives an example of where there might be multiple priorities, while the second example is where a specific ecosystem like a river has been agreed because it's of particular importance to stakeholders. With this in mind, we found it practical and effective to gather suggestions of possible priorities and measures at the same time. Next slide, please, Ant. So to gather this information, and as you've heard already, there's been a number of face-to-face and online workshops, as well as the online survey, with over 1,000 people providing information to the process. And many of you that engage with the process are on this call this evening, and it's great to see your continued interest in the LNRS process, so thank you. We have combined this information with an understanding of the existing local, regional and national plans and targets so that we can assure you that any previous work on identifying opportunities for nature recovery are being considered in the strategy. We've then been asked to create a long list of priorities, and then followed on from this a short list of priorities. I think at this point it's important to note that LNRS is not the toolkit for nature recovery in Oxfordshire. It is part of it, and there are many other mechanisms, plans and strategies to support nature recovery. There will be some priorities that are outside the scope of LNRS, but are nevertheless important, and has been described already this evening. An example of this might be sewage outfalls and how that relates to water quality. We will be keeping a record of those priorities that have been scoped out, and so that they can potentially be used in other plans. So the LNRS has a strong focus on biodiversity. The priority should be the species and habitats that the strategy will focus on supporting, and improvements to the wider natural environment through their conservation and enhancements. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. The responsible authority will share the first version of the shortlist in a 6-week public consultation window that's starting in mid-September, and you'll all be able to comment on that. And the final version is due to be created in spring next year. Next slide, please. So in this long list, we will include information gathered from stakeholders, existing plans and strategies, priorities that address the pressures and opportunities in Oxfordshire, and also priorities that contribute towards national environmental objectives. The latter includes mitigating climate change, for example, through planting trees, or mitigating flood risk by restoring or creating wetlands. We won't include priorities that don't focus on habitats or species. However, recovering or enhancing biodiversity does not just benefit the natural environment. For example, improving biodiversity can help increase land value or support people's health and well-being and access to nature. Whilst these co-benefits are different from the strategy priorities, we can propose action for biodiversity in ways and in places that will achieve these co-benefits. Next slide, please. We will then need to create a short list of priorities. So the responsible authority will have a statutory obligation to review the strategy within the next 10 years. And therefore it is important that we have a manageable and focused list of priorities and the specific actions to achieve them. Experts in nature conservation will help consider this whilst aiming to balance the preferences shown through our engagement work. I've listed a number of criteria that experts will think about when shortlisting. And these include, like, are there specific habitats and species that are important in Oxfordshire? Do the priorities help to deliver one or more of the national environmental objectives? And importantly, do our priorities align and join up with neighbouring county priorities? Next slide, please. In this slide, there's some more details of the criteria we're going to shortlist with. So we've already produced a detailed description of the strategy area and its biodiversity, including opportunities for recovering or enhancing biodiversity. So we need to make sure the priorities address opportunities or pressure in the strategy area and make sure they cover the variation of landscapes and ecosystems. I've already mentioned national environmental objectives. And then we will look to take a balanced approach to contributions from national experts right through to local residents. And as discussed, making sure our priorities are manageable and focused enough for end users to understand and deliver. Next slide, please. So this slide shows an example provided by DEFRA on what our statement of priorities might look like. I'm not sure how well you can see this as well, but it shows the priorities on the left, followed by the potential measures that would need to take place on the ground to achieve that priority. And then there's some other information there on who might be expected to deliver those measures. And in many cases, that will be landowners and farmers. The West of England Combined Authority are racing ahead with their LNRS. And if you want to, they've already got a draft online. So if you want to check that out, then it is definitely worth a look. Next slide, please. So with clear links to the statement of priorities, we will be producing a local habitat map that will show where the existing priority habitats are located and crucially, the areas that could be of potential for biodiversity. However, it is important to note that only potential measures that would directly lead to the areas where they are carried out becoming of greater importance for biodiversity in the wider environment will be mapped. This will mainly mean action to directly create or improve habitat for biodiversity. Unmapped priorities, though, are no less important than those of the mapped ones, and many will have measures that can be undertaken anywhere in the county to enhance biodiversity. Some of those examples I've listed on the slide there. Peat-free compost. You could use peat-free compost, help reduce pressures limiting nature's ability to recover, like reducing the use of pesticides, improve understanding of where rare species are present and populations by monitoring and survey work. So those are just some of the examples. And I believe in the next presentation, we will be showing the method of how we are going to map those potential measures. And I think that's my slides done. Thank you, Anne.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paul. Thank you. So your next slide was, in fact, the introduction for Bob, and moving on to the methodology for the mapping. So I will stop sharing my screen, and Professor Bob Smith will take over to talk to us about that methodology. So over to you, Bob.
Yes, hello everyone. Can people see my screen okay?
That's looking good.
Yeah.
Great. Lovely. Yes, hello. Greetings from Canterbury. I'm based at the Durrell Institute of Conservation and Ecology at the University of Kent. And yeah, as you heard, I'm going to give some background on the broad methodology that we're going to use to produce the habitat map from those priorities. And then there'll be a presentation after this that shows the specific example. So starting off, so the approach that we're going to use is called systematic conservation planning. And the reason that systematic conservation planning was created was to overcome some of the limitations with the status quo. So, all around the world, people are getting together to identify priority areas for nature recovery. But a lot of them have a few limitations. One is that they often lack transparency. So unless you're in the room when it was being developed, you don't really know why those priority areas were identified. And obviously linked to that is then repeatability. If you don't know how it's produced, it's difficult to then repeat the process later when you have more data or want to update things. Often they fail to explicitly account for costs and constraints in the planning process. So they just focus on biodiversity without recognizing that obviously biodiversity is only one form of land use. They often look at the value of each site in isolation. So you might choose the sites, for example, that are the most species rich, but often with biodiversity, species rich areas actually contain the same species. And so if we want to represent broader biodiversity, we really need to think in terms of a network of sites and how each site adds to the network rather than just individual sites on their own. And if we want to make sure that these are representative, we really need a new type of approach. And that's why systematic conservation planning was developed. So this has been going for about 40 years now, developed by a whole set of conservation scientists, practitioners, people from government, NGOs, academia, to come up with an approach that addresses all of the shortcomings with the previous approaches. So it's designed to identify and implement the management of priority areas for conservation and restoration, and it's aiming to be efficient, repeatable, transparent, and equitable. It's the approach that's used most widely around the world, and it provides an evidence base based on defining stakeholder priorities and then translating that into maps to inform action on the ground. So I think that's the critical part of it. It takes a shared vision and translates that through a set of steps into maps where you can identify your priority areas. And it basically involves these 11 steps, which I won't go into detail, but the three broad processes of framing, where you actually work out what the broad objectives of your planning process are, which obviously for the LNRS is is already established. Then there's the process of the spatial conservation prioritization. So this is where you collect the relevant biodiversity and socioeconomic data, set targets for how much of each of your biodiversity elements you want to represent in your priority areas, see how well the existing conservation areas, the existing designated sites meet those targets, and then use software to identify additional areas to make sure that you're meeting your targets. And that's most of what I'll be talking about next, and we'll hear about in the next presentation as well. And then the third step is implementation. So as I said, this is the approach that's used most widely around the world, but until relatively recently, it hasn't really been used in England. I think because we've been pioneers in so much of conservation policy and practice, it's taken a while for this sort of new idea to percolate in. But that's beginning to change. Natural England have flagged up in a number of their reports about how this approach can be really helpful when thinking about nature recovery. And if you actually look at the steps of the LNRS process, you can see it's been strongly influenced by systematic conservation planning. You know, this approach was definitely considered when developing these steps. And if you match up the steps from that table on the left, so I've numbered them with the red numbers there, just showing how they link up. So that process of framing and then coming up with your list of priorities and then mapping them and then producing the local habitat map fits in nicely here. The two components that aren't core of the LNRS, though the ones that aren't covered explicitly by those steps, is step 5, accounting for socioeconomic and opportunity data, and step 7, setting targets. So for this project, we're actually going to use the systematic conservation planning approach, combining it with the LNRSs. So there are 2 extra steps that are additional to what everyone else in every other county is going to do to help really focus in on the priority areas that we need. And to just very quickly with this schematic show the steps of this spatial prioritization process. So this central part that translates the list of priorities into the map showing the important habitat areas. It basically involves defining the planning region, identifying the conservation features, which in this case will be the LNRS priorities, which in some cases might be split into slightly more specific elements, say a particular habitat map for a species or a particular vegetation type, but this is roughly the equivalent of the LNRS priorities. Then you divide the region into planning units, measure the amount of each feature in each planning unit, and then come up with, for each planning unit, a cost or a trade-off value for including it in the network. So this could be a whole range of relevant factors, and we'll talk about what the plan is for the Oxfordshire analysis later. Then you identify which of the planning units are already conserved or already in designated sites, or ones that you say aren't suitable to be selected because, for example, it might be planned that they're going to be transformed to a car park or something else where there's no biodiversity value in the future, so there's no point in selecting it. Then you come up with targets for each of your features, so each of your priorities, and then we generally use software to identify the best places for meeting the targets while minimizing the impacts and maintaining connectivity. So again, the nice thing about systematic conservation planning is how it fits in with the sort of broader frameworks that we have in the UK and in England. There are 4 components that when we're doing this spatial prioritization, we want to take into account. One is that we want a network of sites that are connected. Secondly, we want the sites to be adequate. So for each conservation feature, for each LNRS priority, we want to make sure that we are including enough of it in the LNRS to ensure its long-term persistence. We also want to make sure that the network is representative of broader biodiversity. And then finally, this focus on efficiency. So as part of the process, we're ensuring we achieve our conservation goals, but we're trying to minimise the impact on other sectors. So of those first three, connected, adequate and representative, obviously those fit nicely with the Lawton principles of joined up, bigger, better and more. Setting targets actually involves, for each of our features, for each of our priorities, coming up with a quantitative target of how much we want to be selected by the software. So this could be an area for a particular habitat. We could think in terms of populations of a particular species. Something like a chalk stream, we could say we want 1, 2 or 3 in the area. That can be, yeah, that's all specified up front. And as illustrated by this child looking suspiciously at the broccoli, most people are uncomfortable about setting targets, but they are good for you. So, part of the process is, as I said, working out how much of each feature that needs to be represented in the LNRS. And obviously that's a difficult decision. The ideal is that we should be including everywhere that's got important biodiversity in the LNRS. But at the same time, we have to account for the fact that there are other land uses that we will often need to make trade-offs. But the key thing about setting targets is that it involves making difficult decisions. But if you don't set targets, you're not making explicit choices. And if you're not making explicit choices, you're making implicit choices. So obviously, every prioritization involves making a choice if you're not selecting everywhere. So at least through systematic conservation planning, you can see why those choices were made. People can comment on it. Yeah, it makes it a lot more transparent. Always target setting is a values-based process. In general, in ecology, more is better. So it's the point at which you come along that trade-off between how much do we need for an adequate amount and to represent biodiversity. So yes, working that out has to be informed by science and the conservation context, but it's still translating the values of the people doing the prioritization. But as I said before, by setting those targets, it makes the priority setting transparent. Everyone can see how much of each feature the LNRS was designed to include. And it then makes it really easy to update things in the future if you've got better data on a particular feature, because the plan is that LNRSs will be repeated every 3 to 10 years. So when it comes to repeating that process, having those targets makes that repeatable. Also, it means that you may change the targets the next time you do it based on new information, but again, that's transparent. It's vital for monitoring progress. So you can actually see how, as new areas get managed for nature recovery, you can see how that helps meet the targets. And another critical thing, which I'll explain a bit more about next, is that you can account for other factors in the process without undermining nature recovery goals. So yes, the key part about the software is that it's designed to meet all the conservation and restoration targets. So whatever comes out of the software, it will meet all those targets. But at the same time, you can then start incorporating factors related to cost or landowner willingness, so that if there's a choice between 2 different sites, you can encourage the software to choose the area where willingness is higher or where the cost is lower. So with my funny little emoji network of sites shown on the right, you can see those bottom 2 sites have exactly the same biodiversity data in there. But if the landowner with their yellow smiley face supports conservation on one site, whereas we don't know that there's support on that other site, then the software can say, if we only need one of those sites to meet the targets, let's choose the one where the willingness is there. So yes, we can look at having that cost data to reflect factors that reflect landowner, land manager support. So for example, you could have a lower cost where landowners have shown they're willing to support actions on their land, and you might have a higher cost for higher quality agricultural land, because for food security and also the likelihood of landowner support, you might expect that it's better to avoid high quality agricultural land wherever possible, again with this idea that we're meeting the targets. So even more of those funny emojis. This is to sort of illustrate what happens if you do or don't do this in a systematic way. And the people with their hands up there are shrugging. So if you don't have a priority list and you don't have targets and you don't have a trade-off value, then you get that sort of ad hoc element where often people will say, we need adequate amounts of the things that we know about, but it's not done in a systematic way. And for the rest of the landscape, we don't really care. If you have a priority list, but no targets and no costs, then there's the potential for people to, because we've got the systematic priority list, that's great, but people will, especially on the conservation sector, suggest large amounts of everything, and so you end up with a very large network that probably isn't viable, won't get broader political buy-in. So the ideal is to have your priority list, your targets, and your trade-off values, so that then you can be doing planning that has adequate representative amounts of all of your important priorities, but it's the same time it's efficient. It allows for the fact that every county will have a range of land uses in, and if you use the right metrics, you can account for landowner support in that and increase the likelihood that you'll succeed. So to summarize, and also to flag up, the key thing is that the software that we use is a decision support tool. The outputs are a guide, not a prescription. So, we use this software to help guide the final results. There's a lot of steps from the software output to the final information. The approach increases transparency, making it easier for people to see what the LNRS is seeking to achieve and why a particular site was selected. So for each site, you can say, this is the amount of each feature that's in it, and this is how it helps meet the targets. And it provides a framework for achieving nature recovery that is informed by economic factors and landowner willingness, but not driven by it. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Bob. An awful lot of ground covered there, but as I say, don't forget this is recorded and we'll be sharing the slides, so hopefully people can go back into it. But really that will come to life in the consultation phase when people see the results of this as well. So we have we've got one more presentation now from Steve Wilkes. So Steve, hopefully you're in place, ready to share your screen, and you might just need this.
I'm ready but blocked.
Right, there you go, Steve. You should be available now.
Is that coming up?
You might need to speak up, Steve.
Okay, is that coming up? And can you see
That's
it?
coming up. Yeah, we can see that.
Great. Okay, thank you. So hi everyone, I'm Steve Wilkes. So I'm the Director of Thames Valley Environmental Record Centre. So we're supporting Oxfordshire County Council and the rest of the LNRS team on doing the prioritisation and mapping work in this project. So I was going to give you a bit of a demo and an overview of our method and some of the early findings from some of the sort of demo data that we've been doing to get ready. So this is really taking the work that Bob's just been talking you through and bringing it into our local Oxfordshire County context and taking into account our sort of local data and information. So through that process, we've defined the planning region, which is the county, and then added a 2-kilometre buffer around that to consider the nature that's around us, so we can think about how our solution can connect in with those features. We've divided the region into planning units to make it simpler to do that prioritisation work. We've divided those up into hexagons of about a 5-hectare area, and then further subdivided them by various other features to allow us to take closer account of some particular factors. And then to understand sort of the impacts at a sort of a general scale across the county, we've worked out some trade-off values within each of those planning units. So we've taken into account the agricultural land value of the particular area that's in one of those planning polygons and increased effectively that trade-off value. And in areas where we've got information that people may be willing to or have begun to do work that is sort of likely to align with the local nature recovery strategy priorities, then we've reduced the costs, reduced the trade-off value in those areas. So that means that when we're doing the prioritization work, if 2 of those planning units could be chosen, then it should choose the one with the lower trade-off value rather than the higher one. But if if there aren't any more cost-effective solutions available, then it would choose that one with the higher trade-offs to make sure that it still hits the targets. We've then mapped extents of where particular features might exist, where they exist or where they could be created in the future. And we've used a set of data based around sort of the important habitats that are in the county as a starting point until we start getting the information coming through the consultation process that we've just started to get now to build up that information. So we've mapped those extents and then basically mashed them with those planning units to understand how much of each of those is within each planning unit. And at the moment, most of that's been done about the amount of area that's contained within the planning unit, but we can, within this system, represent the total length of a particular feature, or potentially just even the presence or absence or the number of those things in the planning unit. Then we bring all that information together to show how much of them there are and how much opportunity therefore could be to create, and then use that to guide some of the target setting. So within the prioritization work stream of the LNRS project, we've worked up some initial targets to set to produce some draft maps to give us an idea of the sorts of things that could be being produced. We then put them through the software tool that allows the prioritization to work, which basically runs a whole load of scenarios to identify the most the solution with the lowest trade-off value, but whilst achieving all of the targets. So the targets that we set are minimum targets, not caps, like the number of people that can attend here. So we run that process and we run that a whole number of times and do some small tweaks around the way, around some parameters that coordinate how that works, and then get the most optimal solution. And there can be a number of good solutions in there, but we pick one of those and then we can review that as a team and see if that meets what we're looking for and maybe run it again and produce some more. We then use that set of prioritized areas to produce a set of priority maps, which are then looking at those particular features that have been prioritized and showing where they are based on the planning units that have been selected. And then we're then able to map those to the potential measures that could take place in those particular places to achieve those priorities. So it's a fairly long process, but we've done an amount of work over the last few months to basically automate that to allow us to really focus in on that target setting and reviewing the outcome, and then be able to go around and repeat that process to try and make that work well for our solution. So I'll talk you through a run that we've been doing recently. So this is looking across Oxfordshire. We've identified the types of habitat down the left-hand side of this table. We've got the amount that's existing in the area, and then for each of them we've got a habitat connectivity map, which is sort of showing the opportunity areas for each of those particular sorts of habitats, and then we set targets. So in most cases we've been setting 25% of the existing habitat to be included and 2 times the existing area. Apart from this run, other species rich grassland and woodland, which we've set to not include the existing habitat, but to include only half of the existing area of habitat in the opportunity area. So that gives us the amount that we're looking for. We've also, to ensure that the solution is spread across the county, we've set some minimum targets that at least 5% of the solution should be within each district, and in the city at least 1%, and also that at least 5% of the solution should be in each of the protected landscapes. And then to help with the connectivity further, we've also targeted at least 80% of the solution to be within that interim nature recovery network that's been created. So that then helps shape where that solution can be. So we ran the process and come up with a set of results. Don't need to worry about most of the numbers on the table, but basically based on the targets that we'd set, we've achieved in excess of all of the existing targets, and also almost all of the connectivity targets. So that's come up with a good solution. One of the reasons we're having a lot of existing extra coverage is we're pre-selecting into the solution all of the planning units that are part of designated sites. So it's sort of building the solution out from where is already being protected and important. And that comes up with a prioritized map that looks a bit like this. And just to reiterate, this is the results of one of these runs. And each time we run it, we'll come up with something that's slightly different depending on the targets that are set and the information that we feed into the model. And give you a few statistics about it. That particular run came up with 23% of Oxfordshire being covered. Within the districts, we had a spread of between 19 and 31% of the solution being within each district. 34% of the whole solution was within the protected landscapes, and 56% of our NRN area was included within the solution as well. And 12% of the solution was on ALC grade 2, so the sort of the second highest level of land classification. And this is an example of another map that we produced with a different run. So this run we were including a starting point of wanting to use 25% of all of the existing woodland and a slightly higher target on the amount of woodland to include, and also a larger view of a larger inclusion on the species rich grassland front. So we end up with a different looking map. This came up with about 25% of the county being included within the prioritization. So the example maps that I've shown you for the moment are really a starting point. They've been using the data that we've brought together and the sorts of things that they think will be useful in interpreting the priorities that are coming from the consultation phases. The next phase is to really start looking at those responses and starting to pull together the data sets from that and grouping those things together to allow us to map those priorities, select the targets. One of the things was not very well represented in the actual things that we were the conservation features we were targeting at the moment is the river health and water quality, which are coming through as strong messages from the consultation. So one of the next things we'll be doing is looking how we're going to add those features in specifically. And the local habitat map that we're building is there to prioritize the bigger, better, more joined up, but that does mean that it's not going to cover everywhere because it's trying to join things up. It's also trying to go, where are our real priorities? So we're trying to map where specific actions can take place. Within the strategy itself, we'll be indicating that there are actions that can be taken more widely that we won't map specifically that can be done to improve nature throughout the county. And what will you be able to do? So in September, October, the draft LNRS will be presented to you guys for your comments to help shape the final version. It's done to, the recommendations within there are really there to give you an understanding of what could be done in particular areas and to help focus collaborative priorities, but it really isn't a compulsory, this is the only thing you can do in this place, or this is the thing you must do. So you can do those things in other places and you can choose your own actions. Also, this isn't the only game in town to try and improve nature. If you're looking to improve nature for other reasons, for maybe more people-focused actions, then things like the green infrastructure plans and the local plans will have quite a more direct effect on the urban and neighbourhood planning areas. So those are things that you could also interact with and comment on. And there are lots of other things that you can start doing now using the information from our partners. And I think that's going to be shared later today by Chloe. And that's the end.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Steve. So we're trying to cover a wide range of bases with the content here and give people an overview of what's happening. I've just been doing two things, listening to Steve and checking out the chat, and it's fantastic the amount of questions that are in there and views being shared, and thank you to all those people that are responding and helping answer those questions as well. So now I am going to hand back to Chloe, who is going to talk about how people can submit data on projects. Chloe?
Thanks, Ant. So on the slides I sent you earlier, there's a couple that I just need to ask you to share, please. Unfortunately, my PowerPoint's not working. So I'll start with those two and then finish the rest.
Okay.
There's a lot in the chat around ambition and realism and the levels there. So what we showed today, as Steve's already mentioned, were those sort of examples, and we'll be working towards a lot of different targets, which will require land and space, and that 30 by 30 is an important consideration that we need to work towards as well. So there's a lot in the chat. Thank you for contributing there, everybody. I appreciate it's late and you all had a long day. Thank you. And so what I want to talk about now is a way of telling us more about your habitat projects. And these might be things that you've done or are willing to do. These are focusing on relatively large scale. So we're talking maybe over 1/2 hectare. And if we can go on to the next slide, I think I start to talk a bit more about that. There we go. So this is really an invitation for you to, if you want to, submit us your data about projects that you would like to take or will be taking. This may help us to better understand the connectivity or likely future connectivity across Oxfordshire. And I'm going to talk through these words, so don't worry about reading it all. If you have already told us about areas where you're taking actions, so we had a question about this in the survey, then you don't need to do anything further. If you would like to, you can use the tools that I'm going to talk about, because you might have more information that you'd like to share with us. So anyone who wants to submit what we call spatial data, and that is those areas outlined on a map, can do so in the following ways. The first way that we'd like to invite people to use, if they have it, is if you've already got digitized maps, so online mapped data that shows where habitat actions have been taken or will be taken, or that you might be willing to take but you haven't done yet. You can submit those files to our inbox and the email is there. We'll be able to share these slides again after the presentation, so you'll have all these instructions if you'd like to use them. And if you haven't got a digitized version of what you're doing, I think one thing to say is there's somebody on the call who is actively helping groups to create digital records. And so if they'd like to share their details to help people get in touch with them about digitizing maps of their areas, like parish councils especially, then I think you might be able to find that in the chat. And the other option, if you haven't got any digital records and you are planning to take actions or would like to do that, say you might be a landowner willing to create an area of habitat, particularly farmers who might have larger areas, We'd like to know if you're creating, restoring, or improving habitats. And if you haven't got them recorded, then you can use an online tool that we've created to tell us about what you're planning to do and where. And it will go live tomorrow, and we'll be able to send that link around. The information that we collect from this will go to TVOC, so Steve, who's just presented, and that's within OCC to be able to be used alongside the other information that we've got from organisations like Freshwater Habitats Trusts and Nature Space. So we're looking at different priority areas, different areas where people are already intending to make or create habitats. It is important to know that whatever you add to the map that I'm about to show you will be viewable by others. So we're not asking for personal information on this. We're asking for an understanding of the types of habitats you're looking to create. I have had to make this limited because we are working to add extra information to our LNRS, but there is still limited resource. So unfortunately, a lot of you might look at it and go, oh, we'd like to add this bit, we'd like to add that. I'm afraid I haven't been able to add lots of opportunity for comments and questions, and that's just because we've got to achieve what we can. So I think there's not another slide, is there, Anne? I think now it's for me to show. Oh, sorry, this is a great one. Right, so there's loads of other things you can do alongside the LNRS, and it is really important that that's not forgotten in this process. So there's a lot of other nature recovery actions we can take if we work together. And it's key that people, groups and organisations who are already creating space for nature across Oxfordshire have got the opportunity to bring more people in. We heard from the surveys and the workshops that people were very keen to have more public engagement around nature. So you can join as individuals, communities, councils, businesses, farmers or landowners with various groups that can help either create ideas with you, or you can join a group that might already be taking action. So there are local nature groups, parish and town councils who are taking action. There are catchment partnerships if you'd like to be focused on what you can do in and around rivers. And then there are farmer clusters as well. So information and guidance can be found through Wild Oxfordshire, and the website link is there. Again, we can share all of this, but you can also Google conservation organisations that include people like BBOUT, the RSPB, and also our local nature partnerships share a lot of news and information on their website as well. And just to note, there are a couple of events coming up around local nature groups as well as nature positive business. So there's opportunities for people to get involved in lots of different ways. Okay, I think now what I'd like to do is demonstrate the tool, and this is what will be available for use online from tomorrow. So I'm very much hoping people can see my whole screen now that shows a map. Great, I'm getting some nods. So what we're asking for here is for people to tell us about habitat projects, and the options are whether you've either already completed something before 2025 and we might not know about it, whether you're planning to complete work between 25 and 35. The reason for that is the period of the LNRS that we're working towards for this first version. And then, are you willing to complete habitat work on your land during 25 to 35, but you don't necessarily know what to do yet? So you can tell us about that as well if you're willing. Habitat work is referring to actions that create, improve or restore habitats. And those are spaces for animals, plants, fungi and microorganisms. And you can tell us whether you have or will have created new habitat, improved, existing or restored habitats. And basically you can add pins to our map. And since we're looking at opportunities to connect up habitats to make them bigger, better, more joined up, for this particular tool, we're mostly looking for habitat creation of over 0.5 hectares in size. Again, this is if you haven't already got them mapped somewhere else. The purple areas are areas where we already are aware that there are existing important areas of habitat for biodiversity. So you don't need to tell us about actions you're taking there, but if you'd like to, you can. So that's the information that comes up with it. And then what you'll be able to do is add a pin to this map. We're not really bothered about where we are anymore. We're going to take a habitat action. And I'm going to do it near the Whitnam clumps. I won't be thanked for this, but I would say that I'm an Oxfordshire resident. Perhaps I live there. That would be nice. And you get the opportunity to say who you are on this. I think that it's going to be a little slow because I'm sharing it through Zoom, so my apologies about that. You then get the opportunity to say what the existing area was before you did any work. So I could choose one that said, neutral grassland or some form of grassland or arable areas. I'm not going to click on them because I think I might break the system. And then I'm going to say that I was creating, but you could choose improve or restore. And then you choose the type of habitat that you're looking to create or have created. And I'm going to choose traditional orchard, which is lower in there. So they're all by alphabetical order. We then ask about the size of the area. So I'd like to say something like a hectare. And we do ask, if you're putting that in, whether to tell us whether you're saying it in hectares or acres. We then ask about when you expect that work to be completed and whether you've already secured funding. A lot of the aim around the LNRS is being able to encourage and drive funding towards people willing to take actions that are suitable for the landscape. So once we've collected this, we will then need to do an assessment of whether that fits with the targets and suitability. But we're looking to try and get that information. So I will stop sharing. That's a bit of a demonstration of the tool, and we will be putting that live from midday tomorrow and being able to share that link around. As I say, in the meantime, if you already have that kind of data mapped, you are able to send it to us, and that will create a better understanding of important areas from lots of organisations across Oxfordshire. The link will be open for a month, giving people about 4 weeks to fill it in. Thank you for the people who are getting involved, helping us share this as well. And I'm really keen to see us have the documents that we need, which are going to focus on some large priority habitats that need to be connected, bigger, better, more joined up, alongside things that people can do everywhere, and just a lot more momentum behind nature recovery in Oxfordshire. So yeah, thank you to everyone who's really, really helped us, from facilitation to surveys to the many project groups that are going on behind the scenes, but also for you all who spent your evening with us. That's really kind, and yes, thank you.